Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're making some new friends and enemies with Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us Part 1. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. After leaving Bill behind at the end of the last episode, Joel and Ellie wound up running into an ambush in the messy streets of Pittsburgh. Joel recognized the attempted robbery before the raiders were able to do much more than get in the way of the truck, but seeing the danger coming doesn't always mean avoiding it, and in the blink of an eye, the pair found themselves fighting for survival against a gang of ruthless bandits. These guys are your typical nameless, faceless bad guys, and they fit right into the mold we talked about in the last episode of the kinds of bandits that wouldn't last long as a group in the real world. They spend their time planning ambushes and robbing people who are unfortunate enough to be passing through downtown Pittsburgh, and they likely live by the old, outdated idea of survival of the fittest. And that's an idea that's worth spending some time on, because while its origins have some merit, the version most people are talking about when it's brought up goes back to a fundamental misunderstanding of biology and speciation. The phrase survival of the fittest was first coined by a man named Herbert Spencer in his 1864 book Principles of Biology, as a way to describe what he saw as a connection between social hierarchies and Charles Darwin's relatively new idea of the evolution of species by means of natural selection. Spencer tried to apply the idea of natural selection to society writ large, as well as other places where it didn't really make sense. And his writings would go on to help fuel the fire of eugenics, among other movements, in the late 19th century and on into the 20th. From the standpoint of Darwinian evolution, the phrase actually makes some sense, and even Darwin used it in his 1869 version of Origin of Species, in addition to the more commonly used phrase natural selection. At a very high level, as you should have at least been exposed to evolution in your high school biology class, natural selection, when it comes to genes, describes the change in the frequency of alleles over time in a population. Basically, certain traits might be retained, lost, or changed over generations within a group of individuals. These changes are random, but those that don't hinder the chance for an individual to reproduce have a higher chance of being passed on and becoming more common. People like Spencer and the subsequent eugenics movement took this idea and applied it as a kind of active force within society and the world around us, to ostensibly argue that the strongest survive and get their rewards while the weaker perish and deserve their suffering. Different versions of this idea have been applied to things like social and economic status, where people who have less in society are seen as weak and pathetic because they just don't want to work hard enough, and to justify hoarding wealth, and even things like the idea of trickle-down economics introduced in the 1980s by Ronald Reagan. Groups like the raiders we meet in The Last of Us, as well as other games, seem to want to live by this idea overall as well, deciding that their ability to kill and take advantage of people means that they have a right to do so. This could even be summed up into a single phrase that has been used to justify some of the most horrific atrocities in human history: might makes right. But that idea doesn't flow both ways, as the minute the person who is at the top meets their match and falls, they suddenly recognize the error of their ways, or even ignore the concept completely, like we see later on in the game with another villain we'll meet in a couple of weeks. The crowd that lives by the might makes right idea typically wind up falling because of their hubris, thinking that they are the biggest and baddest around and that no one could ever touch them. The raiders Joel and Ellie run into in Pittsburgh likely thought they had planned for every possible problem, and we can even find a map where they drew up exactly how to ambush people in different areas, showing how far they went with this whole thing. On the surface, that might make them seem like they were really smart, as planning things out is usually a good idea, but in reality, it just shows how dumb they truly were. If they had put the same amount of effort and planning into growing their own food and building a sustainable community, they would have flourished in the long run. They are 20 years into the fall of society, They cannot reasonably expect to be able to rob and kill people forever and be able to last. It's also important to note something else here that is tangentially related, as I said earlier, that Joel recognized the ambush before it even got started. And there's a good reason for that. Joel used to be one of those kinds of raiders. He avoids the questions Ellie has about the subject, but it's implied that he has killed innocent people in the past and spent a fair share of time ambushing groups as a means of survival. It'll come up again later when he briefly discusses the past with his brother Tommy. But I really wish the game had gone deeper, because there is an interesting discussion to be had here around our feelings for the raiders trying to kill Joel and Ellie, and whether we should show them some kind of mercy. If we know that some of the raiders are just misguided, and that some of them could change for the better, or at least realize the error of their ways, wouldn't the right thing be to try and reason with them? What if they drop their weapons, or show us mercy in some way? Should we then be willing to forgive them and allow them to live? These are questions the game never brings up, but they are important just the same because how we perceive those seen as enemies dictates how we treat them and how they treat us. Perhaps the hardline response of show no mercy is right. Why give them the chance to lie and save their own skin if they're just going to be back and killing innocent people next week? Maybe we should believe everyone is capable of change and just trust that they have good intentions, leaving them alive because it is the right thing to do. This would be the more pacifist approach and would fall in line with deontology if we subscribe to that way of doing things. Or it could be that the right answer is somewhere in between, leading us to search for a middle ground that doesn't seem to exist at first glance. If there were a proper society around, a place where laws and a judicial structure dictated how to handle people and their past mistakes, that could provide another possible answer. Though that kind of thing is kind of difficult to find in the world of The Last of Us, since society did collapse. Historically, the right thing to do has boiled down to self-preservation and protecting the in-group. Anyone who wasn't one of us posed a threat, and that threat needed to be eliminated to ensure our future survival. That's a rather barbaric and infantile way of doing things, but it worked for thousands of years before humans started forming more civilized societies. The argument I've seen most often from people, specifically in the comments of some of my Walking Dead game breakdowns, is that society has fallen and there are no moral or ethical ways of doing things anymore. They resort to the idea of survival of the fittest, which coincidentally brings us back to where this discussion started in the first place, and the concept of ought versus is. The is, in this situation, would be that the world exists in a state of kill or be killed, and not taking out the potential raiders could mean losing your own life or the life of someone you care about. It is the hard facts as they exist. And while we could just go along with how things are, there isn't really any good future to speak of if we continue down that road. The ought is up for debate, though. What we ought to do is dictated by our collective ideas and desires. Do we want a world in which we don't need to worry about where our next meal is coming from? Would we like to be able to travel between places without needing to worry about being robbed or killed in the process? Should we be able to lay our heads down at night and not need to worry that we'll be killed in our sleep? Once we decide how we want the world to be, we need to figure out how we get to that state. What kind of government do we want in place? In order to establish rules and consequences for breaking those rules, we'll need some kind of governing body. That could be elected representatives or a community vote on individual issues. It could also be an appointment, where we pick someone to choose people to make rules or to make the rules themselves for everyone to follow. As you can probably tell by now, this topic becomes really complicated really fast. Each and every one of us has our own ideas, opinions, hopes, and desires, and we are hardwired to focus on ourselves and our own well-being above everything else. We can't even begin to think about how society should be run until our own needs are met. And even then, it can be incredibly difficult to know what is right and what is wrong in a given situation, as our beliefs and opinions clash with the beliefs and opinions of others in our group. Maybe I think we should prioritize crops and food production because people need to eat. But you think that we need to prioritize building up defenses because there's another group nearby that seems to be planning to attack. We only have enough resources, time, energy, and labor to handle one task at a time properly, so which do we do? For groups like the Raiders in the game, this debate gets shot down and ignored in favor of just going along with the way things are and focusing on their own individual survival above all else. Long-term planning is difficult, and attacking people to get more resources works up to a certain point, so they never advance beyond a basic societal structure. They exist in a world where no higher power has handed down any rules that would force them to do things any differently, and they don't imagine a scenario where they'll ever run up against anyone with the firepower or ability to overtake them, so they keep going. Some of them, like Joel, live long enough to see how wrong they are, but many of them don't make it more than a few years before they succumb to some accident or injury, or one of their fellow raiders kills them off. But not everyone is a raider, and before long, Joel and Ellie find themselves teaming up with another pair and discovering the true danger of the world around them. Wandering through Pittsburgh, there are a couple of moments that really started to bring me into the world of The Last of Us as I was playing the game. The first was Ellie finally learning how to whistle. She'd been trying to figure it out as we made our way to meet Bill, and that dedication paid off as we walked through the overgrown streets of the Steel City. That moment really humanized Ellie and reminded me of when my oldest daughter was trying to learn that skill herself, and honestly, it's just one of those things that, even as a writer, I can't even find the words to properly explain how it made me feel. Something about that moment just hit me and made me want to slow the game down, despite my earlier inclination to speed things up. Directly after that moment, though, was one that got my philosophical senses buzzing, as the subject of utilitarianism comes up when the pair find themselves surrounded by cars and skeletons in a scene that really drives home just how bad things must have been in the beginning of the outbreak. Ellie asks Joel what happened, thinking maybe the raiders had killed the people around them. And I'll just let Joel respond before we discuss.
Your fellow hunters do this?
Cute. And no, my money's on the military.
Why would they mow down all these people?
You can't let everyone in.
So they killed them?
And dead people don't get infected. You sacrifice the few to save the many.
It's kind of shitty.
Yeah.
From an extremely utilitarian standpoint, the actions of the military here make sense. If they're trying to save as many people as possible, and the best way to do that is by killing off a large number of people, then opening fire on those outside the gates is the best way to achieve that goal. Let's say you have 500 people inside the safe zone, with food, water, shelter, and medicine, and there are 2,000 people outside trying to get in. You don't know if any of those 2,000 people are infected, and letting them in means that not only will they die, but so will the 500 you have inside. In that instance, you can either lose the majority of 2,500 people, or lose 2,000 while saving 500. But from a more humanistic standpoint, there is no justifying killing any of them. Most people would likely be opposed to any of them dying, and would be appalled to see something like this happening in the world we live in. We would see it as an injustice, and would maybe even speak up or fight against that kind of suffering in any way that we could. But of course, it does happen in our world, and has happened quite a bit in the past few years. Nations in various parts of the world have justified acts of genocide and war using this same logic, just masked a different way. It's the idea of us versus them that we've discussed before, with leaders saying things like, we have to get them before they get us. In the early part of the outbreak, in The Last of Us, it becomes, we have to kill them so they can't get inside and kill us. But that hardline stance doesn't always work out for the best, and we can find evidence as Joel and Ellie move through the streets of some horrific acts that took place as the people the military didn't kill off struggled to survive. One scene in particular depicts a trio of soldiers that some of the civilians killed and strung up as a warning or example, with the goal being to get the soldiers inside the safe zone to give up and give out the rations they were storing. Notes that we can find scattered throughout the city point to that tactic being ineffective overall. though the civilians did win out in the end, and we'll wind up dealing with the fallout of that shortly. After dealing with some more raiders and becoming separated in a hotel, Ellie winds up saving Joel's life as he finds himself outmatched by a raider who caught him off guard. This instance appears to be the first time Ellie has taken the life of another person. And while the discussion of this moment could focus on Joel's reaction, I think it's a little more prudent to look at the weight Ellie takes on her shoulders when she pulls that trigger. Many people think that they would be able to end another person's life if the situation warranted it. But few stop to think about how that action, even when justified, will wind up affecting them. Life is one of those things that we as human beings, despite our modern technology and advancements, have not been able to replicate yet. The very essence of what makes something or someone alive remains elusive to us and has been the topic of many debates in science fiction novels. But while we can't create life, we can, and often do, take it away. Every single person that has ever lived has, in one way or another, either purposefully or accidentally taken away the life of some other living organism. It could be your immune system fighting off and killing a virus or bacteria, or you swatting a fly or a mosquito and squishing it flat, or even a situation where you're out hunting for food, killing something like a deer. But for most of us, those things don't really register too much because they aren't human. Taking the life of another human being hits different because it forces us to confront our own mortality and the fact that we were the one responsible for ending the existence of someone who had thoughts, emotions, dreams, and a life not unlike our own. We can empathize with them, understand that they had a mother and a father and possibly other people who loved and cared for them just like we did. Knowing that an action we took brought all of that to a crashing halt, and knowing how easily someone else could do the same to us, is enough to bring an existential crisis to even the most headstrong among us. In Joel's eyes, Ellie shooting the raider he was fighting with wasn't a big deal overall. He's killed plenty of people, and has more or less disassociated from the action by disconnecting emotionally from the world around him. Ellie, on the other hand, still sees life as something worth preserving, and would be dealing with a whole range of emotions. It's also worth noting here that Joel's reaction is based on coming face to face with his own mortality in that moment, as he would be dead if not for Ellie. And having that feeling of being so close to death conflicting with the desire to remain emotionally distant from Ellie, as he doesn't want to risk feeling the pain of loss that he felt with Sarah. That topic gets way deeper than what I normally discuss about individual characters in the Philosophy and Ethics series, and would be better suited to Joel's Friend or Foe video. But it's worth mentioning because it helps to explain a lot about how the rest of the game plays out. As the pair are working to escape the raiders, who are stalking them in the streets from the comfort of an armored Humvee, they run into another pair of survivors as Joel climbs through a window in a building and finds himself in a fight with a stranger. The fight is short-lived, however, as Ellie intervenes and gets Joel to stop wailing on the man when she sees a boy about her age pointing a gun at them. The man's name is Henry, and the boy is his little brother Sam. They were part of a group that got split up by the raiders, and they're trying to get to a meetup point where they expect to meet the others before heading west to look for the Fireflies. Ellie is all for joining up and working alongside Henry and Sam, but Joel is a bit hesitant. Part of him is probably slow to trust what they're saying, as you can never really know if strangers you meet are being honest, fudging the truth, or outright lying, but another part of him is likely working as an extension of his growing connection to Ellie. He's starting to grow close to her, with her mannerisms and personality probably reminding him a lot of Sarah, and while a part of him might be starting to thaw for that one relationship, he knows that the more people he grows close to, the higher chances of losing someone. It's yet another defense mechanism and a display of his lack of emotional intelligence that we discussed in the last episode. But no amount of being closed off is going to deter Ellie from pushing, and in the end they wind up traveling together, at least for a short while. As they make their way back to the building Henry says they've been holed up in, there is a moment that really shows the difference between the pairs, and one that is worth taking a second to talk about because of how silly it is. They make their way through a toy store, and Sam picks up a little action figure and starts playing with it. Henry scolds him and reminds him of a rule that they have where they only take what they need to survive so as to not weigh themselves down with unnecessary stuff. On the surface, this seems like a good idea, but it's also kind of overkill when it comes to simple things that could bring a moment of joy in a broken world. One could argue that breaking the rule they have even once could be a problem, but the reality is that part of being human is using self-control and allowing yourself a little bit of pleasure even when things aren't going good. Even the earliest humans, and other modern animals who have to fight every day for survival, take time to play and entertain themselves, and Henry could probably lighten up just a smidge. Henry and Sam's hideout is situated in an office that actually overlooks the bridge Ellie and Joel have been trying to reach, and after spending a couple of hours resting and waiting for the sun to go down, they all make their way down to try and sneak through and escape the city. Despite their best efforts, things don't go as smoothly as they would have liked, and just as they're getting through the gate, the Humvee shows up and they find themselves cornered. Joel is able to boost Henry, Sam, and Ellie up onto a truck that is blocking their way, but before he can climb up himself, the ladder breaks off, leaving him stuck below. Sam and Ellie both want to help, but Henry doesn't want to risk his life for someone he just met, and he grabs his brother and leaves. Ellie jumps down to help Joel, and the pair end up finding another way out, bringing them around to the bridge that they've been looking for just as the Humvee comes barreling through another gate. They do manage to get onto the bridge, but things continue to spiral out of control as they find a section of it missing, with the only way to escape the Humvee being to jump into the water below. This would be bad enough on its own, but Ellie can't swim, and jumping could wind up getting them killed just the same as facing the Humvee could. But Joel doesn't get the chance to really figure out another way as Ellie winds up jumping, forcing him to follow her into the river below, where the raging current slams them into a rock, causing Joel to black out and leaving us to wait until the next philosophy and ethics video to find out what ultimately happens. To make sure you don't miss out on that and future videos in the Philosophy and Ethics in Games series, make sure you hit the thumbs up button in this video and subscribe to Lost in Games so you can keep up with all of my breakdowns in this and my other series, Friend or Foe, where we dissect the characters in games. If you want to help the channel out in other ways, I've got a Patreon, channel memberships here on YouTube, and a membership program on my website where you can get cool perks like getting your name on the screen while helping me to keep making videos like this and to acquire other games to break down in the future. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.